Hey everyone! Today we're going to take a little trip back in time. But don't worry, it's super relevant for today. We're talking about React's classic mode, class components. To really get a handle on modern React, you kind of have to know its roots. So let's dive in. So let me ask you this. Did you know that in the world of React, there's a really clear before and an after? Seriously, it's like a dividing line was drawn in the sand. And it all comes down to one big innovation. Hooks that just completely flipped the script on how everyone wrote React code, forever. And here's the core of that shift, right here. The before times, that was all about class components. That was the way you did things. But the after era, the one we're living in right now, is completely dominated by functional components, which got these incredible superpowers from hooks. And believe me, understanding this foundation is key to mastering the React of today. All right, so let's rewind and meet the original. Let's talk about the class component. Before hooks even existed, if you wanted to build a component that had its own memory, its own state, and could be reused all over your app, this was your tool. It was the blueprint for everything that followed. So what even is a class component? Well, under the hood, it's just a regular JavaScript ES6 class. Nothing too fancy there. But the magic happens when it extends from React.component. By doing that, it inherits all of React's special abilities, turning a plain old class into a powerful, reusable piece of your user interface. Theory is one thing, but seeing it in code is where it really clicks. So let's take a look at a super classic example. We're going to break down a simple welcome component bit by bit so you can see how all these pieces really work together. Okay, so every single class component has this basic skeleton. First, you declare the class itself, like class welcome extends component. That's the blueprint. Then you've got this special constructor function. Think of it as the setup phase. It only runs one time, right when the component is born. And inside there, you see super props. Now, this line is super important, no pun intended. It's basically calling the setup function of the main React component that we're extending from. You have to do this so your component knows what to do with any props you pass into it. If you forget it, things will break. All right, now we get to the engine room. There are two parts that really make a class component tick. First is the state, which you'll always find inside this .state. This is basically the component's private memory. It's where it keeps track of data that might change. And when that data changes, React knows it needs to update the screen. And how does it know what to put on the screen? That's the second part, the render method. This is a non-negotiable. Every class component has to have a render method. It's the part that spits out the JSX that becomes the actual UI you see. Class components also have what's called a lifecycle. It's like the components on little lifespan. It goes through three main phases. First, there's mounting. This is when the component is born and first appears on the screen. Right after that happens, a special method called componentDidMount gets called. Perfect for fetching data. Then, throughout its life, whenever its state or props change, it enters the updating phase, and componentDidUpdate is triggered. And finally, when it's time for the component to go away, it's unmounted, and componentWillUnmount runs, so you can do any last-minute cleanup. It's a whole life story in code. So, for a long time, this was just how you built React apps. But let's be honest, it's a bit wordy, right? There's a lot of boilerplate code, and wrestling with the disk keyword can be a real headache sometimes. The community started to feel that there had to be a simpler, more elegant way. And then, everything changed. And here's the moment it happened. You can see it on the timeline. Before 2018, it was the era of classes. But then, in early 2019, React 16.8 dropped, and with it came hooks. And folks, this was not just another feature. This was a seismic shift. It completely changed the game and set the stage for where we are today, where functional components are absolutely the standard. So what was the big deal with hooks anyway? Well, it's simple. They let us use state, lifecycle features, and all that other good stuff inside of plain old JavaScript functions. Suddenly, you could have a powerful, stateful component without all the ceremony of writing a class. Your code instantly became shorter, way easier to follow, and often a lot simpler to test, too. And this chart right here really tells the whole story. Look at the difference. All that boilerplate of setting up a constructor and managing this .state, gone, replaced with one simple function call, useState. And what about all those different lifecycle methods like componentDidMount and componentDidUpdate? Well, for the most part, they were all streamlined into a single, incredibly powerful hook called useEffect.
It was a total game changer for readability.
Okay, so you might be thinking, great story, but if functional components and hooks are the way to go now, why did we just spend all this time on the old way, right? Why does this history lesson actually matter for your job today?
Well, this quote really nails it. You probably won't be starting a brand new project and deciding to write a bunch of class components. But, and this is a big but, you are almost guaranteed to run into them out in the real world. Why? Because tons of existing, stable, and important code was built with them. And that code isn't just going to vanish overnight. And this is where the rubber meets the road. You're going to see them when you're digging into that big, important code base at your job. You'll see them when you're trying to contribute to a well-established open source project. You'll even find them in amazing tutorials that are just a few years old. So knowing how they work isn't just some trivia. It's a legit professional skill you need to have. So let's do a super quick recap of the main things to remember. Class components, they're written with the class syntax, they hold their memory in this state, they tap into their lifecycle with methods like component did mount, and while they've mostly been replaced by functional components and hooks, the most important takeaway is you're still going to find them in a lot of legacy code. So that brings us to the big question, doesn't it? Are class components just ancient history, a fossil from a bygone era, or are they a fundamental piece of React's DNA? And honestly, the answer is they're both. They are absolutely the foundation that modern React was built on. And knowing that foundation, really understanding it, doesn't just make you an old school developer, it makes you a better, more well-rounded React developer, period. Thanks so much for tuning in.